In this video, you're going to be setting up a filtering system for the To-Do application, much like we did for the note-taking app. Now, I'm going to outline exactly what I'd like you to do, although the steps are going to be pretty similar to what we did for the Note app. So if you're looking to take this challenge to the next level and make it a bit harder for yourself, you would do that by not referencing the Note app files at all. Don't open up either of those. Work from memory or the MDN documentation if you get stuck on how a specific feature works. Now, you don't have to take that harder path. Use this harder path if you find yourself completing the challenges really easily. If you're having a little bit of trouble and you're still rubbing up against the edges of them, it's okay to reference the old code. I'm just giving you a way to cater this challenge to your specific comfort level at this point in the class. So let's go ahead and outline what I'd like you to do. Down below, I've added some comments to my clipboard so you don't have to bear with me as I type them out. We're going to break this one out into 3 steps. The first thing you're going to end up doing is creating a new div to contain all of those to-dos. So over in the To-Do application, we are going to end up keeping the to-dos at the bottom of the page, but we still want to create a div because that's going to allow us to easily wipe all of the old data as the filter changes and we need to show the new data. And you can put that new input text filter wherever you like. That brings us to step 2. You're going to create a filters object with a search text property, and you're going to create and wire up a new input to actually change that property. So you're going to have to set up the correct input attributes, and you're going to have to add your event listener that targets the input and watches it for changes. When the input changes, update the filters. The last step, Step 3, is to create a render to-dos function. This is where we are going to render the initial data and re-render it as the filter changes. So you're going to have to create that function and you're going to have to call it everywhere necessary. Down below, out of all of this code, the stuff we want to include in render to-dos starts here and ends here. That means in this function, we're going to recalculate how many of the visible to-dos we have left, and we are obviously going to render the latest data. We're still going to have to run the calculation based off of the initial filters though. So does the search text match the to-dos? Work from there. Then out of those, figure out how many are incomplete and continue working through the functionality. Do make sure to also clear that div before adding anything new into it. Now, I'm not going to give you any more hints than this since we have done all of this before. Take as much time as you need to knock this one out and test your work as you go. Make sure that everything is working well. When you're done, you can come back and click play. All right, how'd you do? Hopefully you were able to get that feature set up without too much trouble. In pretty much any real-world application you create, you are going to be working with array data, arrays of objects, and you're going to want to filter them, making it easy for users to find stuff. So building up a skill set around this is going to be super important. Over in the HTML, the first thing I'm going to do is add a div. This is where we are going to put all of the to-dos. I'll toss it right here. I'll set up an ID on it. I'll set the ID equal to something like to-dos. Anything works. Now we have our div in place. I'm also going to add the input while I'm here. I'll put the input below the div for now. Actually, no, I will keep it up above. A new input. This input is going to have an ID so we can target it. I'll call it search text. It is going to have a type equal to text, though that is optional since a type of text is the default value. And I could also set up a placeholder if I wanted to. Placeholder equals filter, uppercase F, to-dos. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is save the HTML file. All of that is done, and we can move on to the To-Do app JavaScript file and start knocking this one out. The first thing I'm going to do is make that filters object. So const filters, this is going to keep track of the latest data. For now, we just have a single one, search text. We'll start it off as an empty string. From here, what we're going to do is make sure that this changes as the search input changes. Down at the very bottom of the file, we can go ahead and toss on another event listener. That's document dot. We're going to use query selector to access the input we just created. What did I call that one? I called it search text. So over here, by ID, search hyphen text. I'll use the add event listener method. I'm going to use which one? I'm going to use the input event, the input event, is going to make sure we track the individual keystrokes, and then we'll set up our function. We have our function. We have our event argument. What are we trying to do? For the moment, just change filters dot search text, getting the latest value. How do we get the input using the event argument? That's e.target. Once we have the input, how do we get its value? Well, we access the value prop. Now that we have this in place, we are successfully updating that filter object. What we really need to do from here is create and fill out the render to-dos function. I'm going to do that up above as well. Const render to-dos. Much like we had for the other function, I will take in the to-dos and the filters. That's going to allow me to run all the calculations necessary to figure out which to keep and which to get rid of. Now from here, I'm going to create a const filtered to-dos, and I'm going to filter that to-dos array. To-dos.filter. We got our function. The function gets called with our individual item. In here, we return a Boolean. I'm going to use a Boolean value that comes back from includes. So we'll start off with todo.text.to, lowercase for a case-insensitive search. Then includes to check if it contains the filters search text value. Filters.search text. And I'm also going to convert that to lowercase. So now what we have is a list of the filtered to-dos, and we can bring all of this code into the mix. So I'm going to grab everything from starts to ends and cut it out, removing those comments. And up above, all I'm going to do is paste it right here. Now, we don't want to just paste it in because that's not going to have things work correctly. There are a few changes we need to make. First step, incomplete to-dos is looking at the original list, not the filtered list. So I'm going to switch that to filtered to-dos. Whoops. Filtered to-dos. Now it's going to make sure to only count the incomplete to-dos in the ones that we're actually able to see. Next up, we have our summary. The summary creates a new H2 and it appends it, but it appends it into the wrong place. It appends it into the body. We don't want that. We want to switch that up and append it into the div with the ID of to-dos. And we need to do the exact same thing down below. Here we are looking at the original array, not the filtered array. So filtered to-dos, and we have to change where the new paragraph gets added from body over to the to-dos data. Now, the last thing we have to do before all of this is going to work is to clear that div before we render anything into it. Otherwise, we're going to get duplicate data. We can do that right here after calculating things, but before rendering things. That is going to be document.query selector. We are going to select the div with the ID of to-dos. And what are we going to do? We're going to use inner HTML to set its HTML value. We're going to clear everything, wiping it completely. Now, if we actually save things, we should be able to see this work, but we have to call the function first. So down below, let's do just that. I'm going to remove all of the comments since we have completed all three steps, and we're going to call render to-dos right here for the initial rendering. Now, we do have to pass in the two arguments it expects, our to-dos and our filters. This is going to make sure we get the initial rendering, but to re-render it with the data as the filters change, we have to call it after we change the filters. So right here, we'll call it again. Render to-dos, passing in the to-dos and the filters. Awesome. Now we can actually save the to-do app file and test things out. So by default, we see all of our to-dos. Now the filter currently comes over here, to the right of the button. We can address the styling later. For now, let's just work on functionality. I'm going to type in something like food. Food shows up in both situations, and one of them is complete. So I can see you have one to-do left printing, and I have my two to-dos that have food somewhere inside of them. As I remove those letters, on the fly, things start coming back. So if I type in W, we get work. If I type in something like E, which is in multiple, we get a few showing up. If I type in EN, we just get the one with EN, kitchen. So there we have it. We have a filtering system for our to-dos as well as our notes. And this is fantastic. It's going to allow us and our users to better use the application. They'll be able to get to what they need quicker. That's where we're going to stop for this one. We have a good setup for both of our applications, and they're starting to get a bit more useful as we go. We got plenty more to do though, so let's jump right into the next video and continue learning about forms, inputs, and user interaction. I'll see you then.